I'm starting a quilt called Shadow Dance, which has a fall Halloween vibe. Let's get started. I'm starting a new quilt called Shadow Dance, and I purchased it from Annie's Attic. This is an older pattern, however, I was able to find the same fabric that they used in the sample, and the fabric line is made by Moda. It's called Late October by Sweetwater. And so I have a charm pack that I purchased that I will be using to make my blocks. I also purchased some yardage. I did get the charm pack and these three fabrics from Etsy. These are all in the same line. And then I am adding in this orange check. I've just had this. I'm not sure what fabric it is. This is not from this same Late October, but I think it goes well with this quilt. And so this quilt is made up of only 2 blocks. It's kind of takes you a while to figure out where those blocks are. But if you look, there is a pinwheel block, and that pinwheel block consists of 4 blocks to make up the entire block. And then the next block is a 16 patch, and that's 4 squares across and 4 down. So this is the second block, and those are the only 2 blocks that make up this entire quilt. So I have all of my fabric. I am not using the same white fabric as a background. There is a white fabric that I believe is what they used. It's kind of a linen white on white look. I did not purchase any of that. And I am going to use this white fabric that has some tiny gray polka dots. This is just, I ordered several bolts from JoAnn's. And so I am going to be using this in place of all the white. I'm going to start with the 16 patch, and so I need to pull 20 pieces from my charm pack, and I'm going to cut my yardage into 5-inch squares and also cut 20 pieces. I have the background fabric cut to 5-inch squares. I have 20, and then I pulled 20 pieces from the charm pack, just in some oranges and blacks and grays. And now to get the 16 patch started, I will take one of the background fabric and a charm pack square, and I'm going to put right sides together and sew down the right and the left at a 1/4-inch seam. I will do that to all pairs. We'll end up with 20 pairs for the first step. So I've sewn down one side. I still have them attached from chain piecing. I'm just going to leave them together, and I have flipped them over, and I will sew down a 1/4 inch on the other side. So now I've sewn down the second side, and you can see they're still attached, so I'll just clip them apart and then we'll go trim. I have all 20 sets sewn on both edges, and the next step is to cut these in half parallel to the stitching, and I will end up with strips like this. And then I need to press the seam towards the print fabric. And then I will take this piece and cut it in half. And I will end up with strips like this, and I will have 4 of these type of units from one square. And then I can start putting these together in the 16 patch. So if you look at the directions, I need to just randomly, of course, take 4 of these squares and sew them together. That would make 1 row, and then I need to do that again so that I have 2 rows, and I will sew those 2 rows together to make the 16 patch. So let's go get this cut, and I can start to work on pairing those together. After getting these cut and pressed, I have laid out the blocks to make up each 16 patch. So I have 4 on top and 4 on bottom, and I have just layered 10 in each group, and I laid them out just so that I could get a random mix of colors for my blocks. And so what I'm going to do now is sew together each set. So I think I decided it will be easier to sew all 10 of these sets together, and then I'll cut those apart, do the same thing with this set, and so on, so that they will be easy to keep in order instead of chain piecing 80 blocks and trying to keep them in order. So I will just do sets at a time. I will, set them back up like this. Of course, they will be sewn together. Then my next step would be to then sew those 2 sets together, these 2 sets together, and then finally the top and the bottom, and then I will have 10 blocks. Also, I wanted to note that because I pressed all of the seams towards the print fabric, that when I put these together and line up the seams and nest them, one seam will be going in one direction, the other seam will be going in the opposite, so that it will lay flat and hopefully be a little bit easier to line those seams up. All right, let's go get these sewn together. So I have all the pairs sewn together, and now I need to sew each row together. But I want to note something, that when you sew 2 together and then get ready to sew it to the next 2, double check that the seams that were just sewn are going vertical, because it's easy to switch this, because it's a 4 patch, and so it really can go any way. But you want to try to have the seams go the same way. So you wouldn't want one pair sewn with the seam across that I just sewed and the other one up and down. So that's just one thing to keep in mind if you're doing this quilt. So that once I sew these together, all 3 of the seams I can press into one direction, and then I will do the opposite for the bottom row. When I sew these together, all of these seams will go in the opposite direction. It doesn't matter, you know, which way, just one top row will go one way, the bottom row will go another, so that when I get ready to sew those two together, again, we'll have seams that nest. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and go sew these 4 patches together, and then sew those 2 rows together, and these 16 patches will be done. I have all of my 16 patches sewn together, and I am super happy with them. For the most part, they're pretty lined up. I have a few spots on a couple of the blocks that, you know, weren't quite as aligned as they should be, but considering that this is just my start of my second quilt ever, I am super happy. So if you've seen my video on my very first quilt, it was the Lemoyne Star, and I have that quilt top completely done, but I'm still needing to quilt it, you know, to the backing. And then I have a few blocks done on another fall quilt that I'm working on, actually 3 of the same quilt. And I worked on a couple of pumpkin blocks for the pumpkin harvest quilt. And that's the only quilting that I've done. And so these, again, are the start of my second quilt. And I'm super happy with how they turned out. And so I'm done with all 10 of the 16 patch. I do want to note that I did press the seam sewing the 2 rows together open, and I used this little strip stick, and I talk about that in my Lemoyne Star quilt video, but it just helps. It's basically just a wood, like a half round wood piece. It feels like it's covered with batting, and then of course has a muslin cover, and so you can see it's flat on the bottom and then kind of, you know, rounded at the top. And so when you press a seam open, or I guess you could use it to press to the side, I use it mostly when I'm pressing seams open, is you put the seam that you're going to press and you press it, and I think it does 2 things. One, it elevates, so you can see that the seams on either side of the seam kind of fall down, so you're less likely to, as you're ironing or pressing, to flip other seams. And so the second reason that it's so helpful is that it's super hard. You can press really firm and get a really, you know, nice seam. And so I used that to press these open. All right, so my 16th patch is done, and I'm going to get ready to start on the second block, which is the pinwheel block.